Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Art of Flow, baby. All right, let's get into it. Today is part 8, so we're going to be going over isolations. We kind of talked about this topic a little bit in our grid theory video. If you haven't seen that, I would definitely recommend you to watch that before this one. But if not, I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can watch this one and watch that one later, or not watch that one. I mean, it's the internet, right? But I definitely want to expand more on points, how to really move around those points, especially when we're working with tech, which is finger tutting, but it's basically more complicated because you're adding more illusions on how to move through points to points, and definitely making those motions so that you can bring out that illusion a little bit more, so you can get a little bit more technical. You can bring out more complexity to how you're moving around the grid, and it's really hard to put into words on how to travel, but we can definitely give you some examples on how to do it, on what you should be focusing on, and what to do when you're labbing and trying to figure out new moves or new things to improve on. Again, with finger tutting, it's all about right angles and how you keep your points isolated in space. So there's definitely different ways to move throughout the points when you're using finger tutting. We definitely went over single point isolations on grid theory, where you're just isolating one point and then traveling through it. You can definitely use it with tutting again, where you're just isolating one point. Like, let's say you're isolating a point on your wrist and you're just moving around that point, right? Some people can do this where they bend it all the way down, but again, you're not losing that point in space, right? You have like a stationary point that you're moving throughout. It doesn't really have to be your wrist. When you're working with tutting, it can be like your fingers, right? You're moving throughout your finger point isolated thing, but you gotta mess around to see how many ways there are to move with those points, right? That's gonna come with you practicing your moves, seeing where you can travel and where you can move around to. And again, you can definitely move points when you're using single point isolations. You don't have to stay at one point, right? You can be moving points and isolating other points in there. But you got to be aware that you're moving those points. But again, we went over that a little bit in my grid theory video, so I would recommend you to watch that again. But we're going to be going over a little bit of more of the technical side, right? When you want to get more into that techie side and how to move, how to make your moves accentuated, how to be moving throughout the points. And we're going to be starting with the basic structure, right? And if you see here, you have 3 points, right? You have your index, middle, and your thumb. And you basically are hitting all the axes in here, right? You have the x-axis, you have the y-axis, and you have the z-axis, right? And it's kind of cool that, your fingers actually align perfectly with each axis right here, which it kind of goes back to my sacred geometry video, where everything is composed of sacred geometry and we can see it everywhere, even in our anatomy. That's why we're creating patterns with our hands, and we're creating those illusions, right? We're working with geometry, symmetry, isolations. We're working with the three-dimensional grid, right? So you want to be working towards moving with that space. It's kind of like you're limited to how you move, especially when you're working with tech and you want to stay connected. You're basically like building a puzzle with your movements, and you're just moving around in a certain motion because you have certain rules that you have to stick to when you're isolating stuff, and that you're making those illusions that you can only move in certain ways, right? Like I said, it's kind of hard to put into words. We're getting very technical here. That's why it's called tech. But you're going to start practicing with this, and you're going to start feeling the motions and the ways you can move. We went over rotation, tracing, wave tuts, all those things, but you kind of got to add motion to your single hand movements so you can give those illusions, right, that you're moving throughout those points. Again, you can also watch Youngblood's video on isolations. He kind of went over it a little bit. However, the problem with that video is that he doesn't really go over all the fingers and what you can do. Because let's say you have this structure right here with these fingers, right, your ring and pinky. You can't really, just go to this structure right here. You can't just, fold and move those points. However, if you're doing it with your middle and index finger, you can definitely move that structure to another dimension, right? Like you're just flipping it. However, you can't really do that with the other fingers. You can kind of push them. Hold on, you can kind of push them to make that structure, right? However, it's not going to look so clean when you incorporate it to a show because your hands aren't really meant to move that way. Again, you can't really do that, right? You can't open up those right angles with your ring being at the top and your pinky being on the bottom. So you got to be careful with that because there's certain ways that your fingers can move, right? Because we have ligaments, tendons, so you can't really just move them wherever you want. But with this, right, you're hitting the x-axis, the z-axis, and the y-axis, right? So you can kind of like pretend there's like a wall right there, right? You can be pulling out fingers. There you have your z-axis. Then you can pull away and bring out the x-axis, right? Then you can pull down and bring your thumb out, and you have those 3 points, right? And you can be rotating this, and now this one is at the y-axis, this one stays at the z-axis, and this one is on the x-axis, right? You're still doing those movements and isolating each point. You can make it 2 points right there. You can make it 2 points right there. You can make it, again, 2 points right there. It's just the way you move and you make your motions and those animations, right? You're making those animations so people can visualize that puzzle that you're creating in front of them with your lights or your fingers. But you're traveling in certain rules, right? If you want to add more illusion to your shows, because you're isolating certain points on certain axes, and that's the way you can move with one hand, right? You can be moving that over there, then isolating this point over here, bringing another point out over there. So now you have more to work with, and that's how you really move around the grid, right? You're adding motions so you can add that depth perception, and you can move around that 2D and 3D grid, right? Because when you're just isolating one point, you don't really have to think too much about where you're moving because you know where your point is. But when you're bringing out like different points, you have a lot more to work with. And depending on which point you want to isolate, right, you can have certain moves come out. You don't really have to just move around the grid with that. You can definitely disconnect and do other things, bring out other moves. However, when you're working with tech and you want that puzzle to be more pronounced, you want to be using those illusions, right? That you're working with that grid, and there are only certain motions you can do to get to those points. You're just not moving freely around like if you're doing liquid, where you're not really isolating anything. You're just moving in a pattern. But when you're working with tech and you're working with angles, right angles, and you know where you can move with each point, then you can start making new moves, and you can start seeing where the patterns lie, right? Where you can really move, or where you can accentuate to make those better looking, I guess. So that's with tech. That's why you don't really see many tutorials on tech, because it's kind of very hard to put into words unless you're actively just in front of that person and telling them, explaining to them how they can move, right? But you're basically just isolating points and moving through them. However, let's say we go back to this structure again, right? You can make this 2 points, and there you're touching the same axis, not really together, right? But they're in the same space on the set axis. So now you're just working with 2 points instead of 3 points, right? So then you can just move around that way, or you can bring it out back, and now you have those 3 points. Again, here is 2 points because they're in the same axis on the x-axis right here, right? So you transform those 3 points into 2 points right there. So now you can be rotating the structure however those points are together, especially if you bring those 3 points together, right? Let's say you have that, and then you come over here. See, now you have those 3 points together, and it's making 1 point, right? You have them all together, so they're moving together. You can bring them out again, and there you have more room to move throughout the grid. And then you can use your single point isolations and combine them, right? Like in the Youngblood video, you see him doing this, where he's bringing out the thumb, he's hinging them out, and then you're just moving to that point. It's about knowing how many points you have out in the grid, and then seeing those movements that you can do. Because right here I can't really move my index to my thumb, right? I can definitely close my thumb and move it to my index and have that point isolated there. Then you can rotate, bring that finger out. Let's say we rotate out, we can isolate the thumb still and be moving throughout the grid like that. So again, it's gonna come with practice. Tech comes like after you've been gloving a while and you want to expand and you want to get better at those illusions and doing tech. However, tech is not all there is in gloving. But when you're labbing and stuff like that and creating new moves, you want to be practicing those ways that you can be moving throughout, right? And how many points you have out, and be aware of those points, and be aware of your finger dexterity, right? Because not all fingers can move in the same motion, because this one only like hinges out, but this one you can be moving down and up. So you got to be aware of how you can move through those points. But when you stay connected, you give that illusion, right? That illusion that you're working with an imaginary puzzle box, and you're working with that grid mentality, with those isolations, when you're isolating a certain point and you're moving to that point. You're not moving it. And like I said, you don't have to stay connected, but when you stay connected, that gives more of a I forgot the term it was, but Youngblood had mentioned this in his videos, where you're morphing. There you go. You're morphing into other moves, and it looks like one single movement that you're doing, because you're not breaking that connection, right? You're just moving through those points, isolating, moving, opening up new structures, and then you can see which ways you can move, and it kind of gives that infinite movement, right? Just like when you're doing like finger rolls, right? You're doing like a motion that's not really being broken. You're just moving throughout the grid with finger rolls. But with tech, if you stay connected, you give that illusion, right? That everything is coming together fluidly. You don't have to be doing really tricky moves, but it opens up new points as you go. And once you understand how those points isolate in each dimension, in each axis, then you can start getting more technical. Like, let's say we have this structure right here, right? What can we do? Let's say we isolate my index finger right here and just move the whole structure back, so we can just open that up, right? It's still the same thing. You're just opening up new points and moving that structure. And then when you tilt it, you still have that point right there, that point right here, that point right here, right? So you can isolate any point you really want to, and you can move, right? We talked about tracing. You can be moving over here. Now you have that point over here, and see what you can do with that. See where you can move with hinges. But when you're using those axis isolations, you can add new movements, new animations to your movements to be like, oh, okay, he did that, so that acted as an illusion that made it more pronounced, and that's why you see technical glovers isolating and moving around and knowing how to use that grid to move, right? You can be doing like one hand movements where you're isolating one point and moving throughout, and you can add those with the other hand so you can bring out more illusions on how to move. Like I said, you're just rotating stuff, you're tracing stuff, but you're also adding that depth perception with those axes, that you're moving left and right, you're moving up and down, and you're moving in and out, right? So once you add that to your tech practice, then you can start adding more illusions to it, and it just makes it more appealing, I guess, because you know how to move in those 3 points, right? You can be hinging over there and knowing how many points you have out, right? Even with, let's say, clusters, right? I've been practicing clusters as well. You're just isolating certain points, because here you only have like 1 point, because these two are together, and then you have this point and you have this point, right? Let's say my thumb is down, so you don't have that point. So you're basically isolating certain points and then traveling through it, right? Then this one can go up, and then you're traveling to that one. Then you can open it back up. You can be, hold on. You can bring this down and then isolate this one down here. And you're just traveling around, right? You're just moving and isolating. Moving, isolating. I can give you an example with the 9 points. Again, I'm not really that good with clusters, but you can basically open it up, right? Then you have 3 points you're working with. And then let's say I want to isolate on the top. So you just move the whole structure through there. Then you can open it back up. Let's say I want to isolate here. You just move over there, open it back up, isolate this one over here. That's basically all you're doing. It comes down to finger dexterity, how clean you can do it. But you want to keep that flow mentality, right? That everything's flowing together. You're isolating through points. You're moving to those points. And again, it doesn't really have to be just with finger tutting. It can also be with tutting as well, depending on what you're isolating and which ways you can move, right? Because it has to follow a certain rule if you're isolating stuff. And you want to make sure you're practicing in the mirror as well to see your structures and how clean they look, because you're working with the right angles. Again, you can be using a more complex way of finger tutting. However, those rules still apply. How you're moving throughout the grid, which ways you can move, and what ways you're isolating each point, right? You're isolating each point and knowing how each finger can move throughout. So again, I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I know it's kind of like a complicated concept to learn, but once you practice this a little bit and seeing which ways you can move with those axes, then it's going to start becoming natural, because you can see the structures that you're making, and you can see which ways you can move or what illusions you can do. See, like right there, I'm just moving through that x-axis. I'm putting this one down, and now that point has disappeared, and my structure has moved from here on the y-axis to the x-axis over there, right? Again, you can be moving that point using the z-axis as well. Because see here, I'm just hinging this point open and bringing a new point to the grid. Again, you can be rotating the structure. You don't really have to be bringing fingers out or bringing new points out, but you understand how those points move, right? So again, you can be practicing this when you're labbing, when you're trying to come up with new moves, and see which way you can move and make new structures, right? This comes again with pass-throughs, right? You're just basically isolating one point and then moving forward with the other one. You can switch it around, be moving that one, be moving this one. Again, you're just working with the y-axis, with the z-axis, right? So there's a lot of things you can do, but once you have that mindset of those points and how these axes work, then you can start messing around and creating new stuff. Again, not really giving you a combo, but I'm telling you how you're using that 3D grid and what points you're isolating. And again, you don't really have to be connected, but when you're using that morphing mentality, or you want to be practicing how to move through each axis, that becomes a key thing. What I like to do is when I practice, I like to think I have two triggers, right? Because you have two hands. So I want to move with this one first, then see what I can do with this one, then move this one again. Like I'm just taking turns with each hand to see where I can move throughout the grid, right? Taking turns on which hand moves and which trigger I use, right? Because you can be moving both hands too. Like it doesn't really have to be one hand moving. But when you're using that tech, you want to be isolating one hand and then moving the other, right? You want to get good at moving with both hands through those axes points. So again, I hope this made a little bit of sense. I know I kind of went all over the place, but it is a complicated thing to explain. It's complicated. It's hard. It takes a lot of practice, obviously, because your hands are not used to just moving in with those certain rules, right? You have to really be aware of that grid, of how each axis is moved, and which points you're isolating, right? Again, if you have this structure, you're still using that grid mentality. Again, you're just opening up, isolating. You can be isolating each one of those, but practice with this structure so you can get the feel of how each point moves, right? And working with the Y, Z, and X axis. And that will make your show pop a little bit more. You'll become better at traveling through the grid, better at finger tutting, and better at making your shows look more complex and more techy, right? But yeah, that's as far as I'm gonna go with isolations for now. Just be practicing how you can move through the grid, making new points, and knowing how you're isolating each one. And practice in the mirror, guys. Practicing in the mirror is gonna save you a lot of time because you can see those structures and how they look with the lights and how you can pull off more cleaner moves, seeing your angles. Right now, I'm not really concerned about how clean they look, but I'm just traveling throughout, right? It kind of feels natural after you get this because you know which way you can move and what you're isolating and where you're moving. So again, it's going to come with practice, but just keep practicing that, how you're moving throughout each axis, and it's going to become easier and natural. Like I said, nobody can really teach you how to do tech because everybody moves differently and everybody has their own little moves, but everybody uses those axes and those motions, those laws of how each finger moves. So once you have that in your mind in your practice sessions, then you can start using your own moves and seeing where each finger can go in what axis, right? Like you're just manipulating those points. And again, you can make those points into one point. You can bring them out and be making more points. Like right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 points here that I'm working with. And you can be isolating either one of those to make less points, make more points. Again, it's going to come down to how you move, how you incorporate those moves. But again, having that grid mentality and knowing how you move and adding those motions to make your moves more accentuated. Again, I think we're almost nearing the end of this series. I want to kind of go over more sacred geometry though, but that's not going to be with the art of flow. Like I just wanted to make a series overall teaching you kind of like the basics. Well, not the basics, but kind of like all that is involved in this art form because it's a lot, right? And especially if you want to be good at that art, it's going to take all that we mentioned in this video, all those concepts, all those technical things, you know, that grid mentality, flow, showmanship. You're integrating all of that together into the show. So knowing all of this, you're going to be more aware of what you're doing, and you're not just going to be moving all over the place, right? You're going to be moving in certain directions and using those points. Even if you're not touching those points, you're working around that grid mentality, and your show is going to be looking more fluid because you're working with all that in your mind, right? You're controlling your fingers, you're controlling the show, where we go, what points you open up, and what points you isolate when you're working with tech, right? Again, guys, I'm just rambling now. But we're going to be making probably 1 or 2 more episodes. I definitely want to go over patterns next. We're going to be going over patterns because there's certain patterns that you can do with each hand or both hands. Not really using a certain concept, but there's a way that your hands move, right? Like your arms move. You can be moving in a square motion. You can be moving in a circle motion. You can be moving in a figure 8 motion. You can be moving in a triangle motion, right? So there are some patterns that you can make without using a certain concept, but you can be using whatever concept you want with those patterns you're making, and the ways you can move with the grid. It gives you like a much more flowy feel when you're working with certain patterns that you're doing, right? That comes with grid mentality and sacred geometry again. So you're using those patterns in accordance with your show, and you're moving in certain motions, right? You can be even moving just in a straight line, diagonally, but again, you want to be using those shapes, right? Those circles, triangles, lines, all that geometry in your shows, and we're going to be going over that in the next episode, right? I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of tech. But yeah, guys, I think that's it. It all comes down to how you practice. But once you have that in your head, right, you know the rules, you know how you're moving through the grid, and that can add more spice to your show, like I said. Just be practicing that, and definitely watch Youngblood's video again on isolations. There's not too much content on this. Again, it's not that popular. It's not like a mainstream art. So that's why I kind of want to make this as in-depth as possible, so you can understand where we're getting at, right? And how you become better with that in mind. So it's a lot of stuff, I know. But I hope you can gain something from this video, and you can improve in your finger tutting and in your tech with these points, isolations, and moving through each axis, right? So that's going to be it for isolations. I will see you guys in the next episode, and keep flowing, guys. Keep practicing, keep getting better. The more you practice, the better you're going to be looking, the better you're going to feel, the better your show is going to be looking overall. Again, everybody flows differently, but these rules are universal to whatever flow you're doing. So this can add an element of amazingness to your shows with these rules, and it could just make you better in less time. That's the goal, right? Becoming better and knowing how to throw a show and how to move with certain motions, right? With all these concepts that we've been talking about, right? Because you want to make your show fluid. You don't want to be stopping at certain points, not knowing what to do, because you know how to manipulate the grid. So you can be doing certain stuff from awkward positions because you know how to work around that, right? Again, difficult to put into words. I'm going to be quiet now because I can talk about this all day. But yeah, so keep practicing, keep flowing, and I'll be bringing you the next episode soon, guys. Peace.